been asked to speak today about achieving high quality growth and development in London. I'm choosing to do so today from the public sector perspective through the lens of high streets. Why high streets? Because they're important microcosms of everything that represents London life and our economy, but also because they're fundamentally important for London's growth. So City Hall has been interested in high streets for some time, going back to 2011. High streets are places where Londoners spill out of their buses, trains and tubes, but they're also places where London's economic and social activity gathers in pubs, libraries, clinics, schools, community centres, restaurants, cafes, salons, churches, mosques, temples, and of course shops as well. They're diverse and adaptable places, and they're integral to our urban structure. In London, they're a particularly unique asset, as distinct from the rest of the country, because they tend to be walk-to places as opposed to drive-to places in London. In recognition of this, we commissioned research, as I said, back in 2011 to look at the importance of high streets in London, and found that there's over 600 high streets in London, and roughly half of London's total jobs outside the central activity zone are on high streets, and about half of all the businesses are on the high streets as well. So, as we suspected, they're extremely important to London's economy. But we've built on that work recently and done some analysis to look at the figures within the London Plan for housing growth in London, strategic housing assessment. And if you look at an area of 200 metres from London's high streets, actually around 69% of London's growth as set out in the London Plan can be accommodated within 200 metres of high streets. So the importance of London's high streets to growth is not just about their capacity to accommodate growth, but also about their importance to London's livability, which is a word I was pleased to hear cropping up in the panel before. If I had Greg's talent for running polls, I would ask you that how many people in their decisions of where to live in London had the local high street up there as an extremely important factor. You can, yes?
Right, in making your decisions about where to live in London, how many of you considered the vibrancy of the local high street as a factor in that? If you did, raise your hands. Thank you, and if you didn't, raise your hands. Okay, that's a 95 fight, 5 in favour, Debbie.
I'll take that, thank you. I want to evidence that I think a farmer's market is becoming a fundamental human right in London now. So, we need to continue to support high streets and consider how they can support growth. So, to respond to Greg's question, how do we do this then? We have funds. We're very fortunate in City Hall insofar as the Mayor and the London Enterprise Panel has prioritised funding to support projects across high streets. As Daniel said, over £200 million investment has gone into approaching 100 high streets now in London. These funds are all directed towards supporting vibrancy and growth in the high streets, ensuring they're better managed, addressing empty space and proactive strategies for future development. And as Daniel mentioned, we'll shortly be launching £20 million worth of new funding. I'm going to talk you through 6 tactics that we sort of characterise our work, if you like, in terms of how we support high quality growth in London's high streets. Firstly, place-based action. It links nicely to the last panel and talking about the importance of placemaking. There's an inexhaustive list of things that I only touched on that happen on and around high streets. But also high streets are on a continuum of change. The papers would have you believe that there's a crisis in high streets now. High streets change all the time and are remarkably resilient and creative and innovative. But this does mean that there's no one-size-fits-all, and therefore we find in our work it's fundamentally important to begin with the place, understanding the place and the communities that characterise that place, and developing tailored solutions to that. I loved one of Ed Glazer's quotes from earlier. He talked about a city that is full of the public realm. It's very true, and we see our role in City Hall as being one of pulling together partnerships and a certain amount of persistence in bringing together high street projects. Number 2, policy and action. Daniel touched on the range of London Plan policies, and there's a town centres SPG that responds to the importance of high streets in London. But also we have a publication called The Mayor's Actions for High Streets that describes why they're important and the strategies that we think are important to support their growth and their contribution to London's growth agenda. Policy considerations that are relevant here. We've talked about the London Finance Commission today, devolution of property taxes as well, all relate to high streets as well. Number 3, I have innovate. So I've touched on the fact that high streets are spectacularly innovative spaces, and in the public sector I think we've got a responsibility to respond to that as well and behave in a suitably innovative way. An example, yesterday the deadline fell on our second round of Space Hive funding, so we've invited community and local organisations to submit proposals to us for funding of up to £20,000 for their local high streets. The most wonderfully creative projects, we got 63 bids in. We can't afford to fund them all, so we're going to have to go through a very difficult process of choosing. But we are very aware of the extent to which high street communities are digitally enabled. They're on social media, and we really wanted to reflect and respond to that agenda. Number 4 is the support offer. For precisely the reasons that I outlined before, the diversity of high streets, the change continuum, the unique approach needed for them. It's quite hard to do projects around high street places, not least because of the property ownership and the fragmented property ownership. So we work very hard to support projects, and be it projects that we're funding or wider and more strategic conversations about places, be it Old Kent Road and potential options for the Bakerloo line extension, for example, or be it funding a £10,000 project in Beckenham. So we work quite hard to support those projects, and we have network events, we have consultancy support available as well, and we also have design review arrangements through the Mayor's Design Advisory Group. Number 5, research to inform the debate as well. So we've carried out research on accommodating growth in town centres and addressing the perception that there's a tension between housing growth and ongoing flourishing town centres in London. We've also done research about incubator, accelerator and co-working spaces, artist studios. We're planning research around markets, as in street markets, governance of industrial spaces and also follow-on spaces for workspace. Number 6, quality, and I was pleased to hear this come up as well. So be it funded programmes or be it more strategic, longer-term discussions around places, we're obsessive about the pursuit of quality. So we definitely don't play a numbers game in the work that we do, and we try and work very hard to consider what the best outcomes are rather than just pulling something over the line, which is a sort of terminology that I personally don't like. And then I just wanted to take a second to talk about the risks and constraints and issues that sort of fight against those tactics that I've just described. So I mentioned that, there's a perceived tension between growth, in housing growth in particular, and retail and town centres. And of course, that's something that we need to continue to address, and it goes back to what I said about understanding the unique characteristics of places. Capacity of the public sector to respond to growth is something that we're hearing from the development community and from local authorities, can be an issue. Fragmented ownership I've touched on as well. And that can lead into issues with balance. The sort of arguments over the proliferation of betting shops, pound shops and chicken joints is well rehearsed. And what I wouldn't necessarily put at the top of this list, but changing retail models. I actually think that the high street has responded in London very well to changing retail models, and I think it's really driven out some creativity and innovation. So to summarise then, 6 tactics: place, policy, innovate, support, research and quality, and I'll leave it there.